Hi, my name is James O'Keefe. I'm the principal of Rollins School. Welcome to the JFK exhibit that I put together here in our auditorium. Years ago, my dad worked in Boston at the Custom House, and we kind of did everything in Boston, visiting the State House, going to the Freedom Trail and things like that. And he really was interested in history, and he's passed that on to me. As a result, I always collected things. Actually, one of the things I've collected was something from Endicott Chubb Peabody, who was the governor of Massachusetts during the Kennedy administration. And Mr. Peabody was actually born here in Lawrence, Mass. And he came on during that tragic time and announced the death of President Kennedy to Massachusetts. And we, of course, took it very hard, JFK being from Massachusetts. And I always collected things of Endicott Peabody, John Volpe, Francis Bellotti, and that continued. And as a young boy, I used to write to the presidents. And my first president, of course, that I wrote to was John F. Kennedy. And in those days, they would send you an autograph of John F. Kennedy and his little biography and a picture of him. And this is one of the first things I received from him. And I continued doing that with President Johnson and President Nixon, and I continued writing. And I just like to write letters to everybody, and I used to write letters to the Chamber of Commerce, to the state capitals, and I loved receiving mail. When November 22nd, 1963 happened, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, I was at St. Patrick's School in South Lawrence, and the principal of the school announced right around 12:30 or so, 1:15, that there was word that from Dallas that the president had been shot. And in those days, we were released from school, and I had lived in South Lawrence on Kent Street. And I remember leaving school and walking home and seeing cars on Winthrop Avenue stopping and people getting out of their cars and really crying and talking. And they were just distraught. My mom had worked at First National Stores, which was right in the plaza, the 114 Plaza there, and where Go $1 is now, and she was at First National. And as I went in to talk to my mom, everybody at that point realized that the president had died. And it was just mass chaos. Everybody was just distraught at the president dying. And I have never, in all of my years, seen anything like it, even though I've lived through September 11th, 2001. But the death of John F. Kennedy affected everybody in many different ways. And of my generation, I think it affected us the rest of our lives. I started collecting things on John F. Kennedy during when he was the president. You know, people my age back then, when I was at St. Patrick's School, I probably was one of only the few people in my class that knew John F. Kennedy was going to Dallas, Texas. And because I followed politics, and I followed certainly the President of the United States. And one of the reasons, you know, I liked John F. Kennedy was because of his enthusiasm, his energy. And, you know, I knew several things about him that I got a kick out of. I knew he loved to swim. I knew he was a hero. I knew he loved to read books. He was a voracious reader, and he read 1,200 words a minute. And he was a guy that would read a book standing up. He would read a book in the bathtub. He would read a book at any downtime at all. He was constantly reading. And I think as a result of all that reading, he was able to come up with, whether it be a civil rights speech or American University speech or Rice University speech, the passages, the eloquence of the way he spoke and used words from all the different books that he had read. He actually, in fact, was the author of 4 books. We all know the famous book of Profiles in Courage, which is about 6 U.S. senators. That Profiles of Courage award is given out to this day at the Kennedy Library in Columbia Point in Boston. He also wrote another book called Strategy of Peace, a book that would be quite interesting today to read, would be A Nation of Immigrants that he wrote. And while he was in school at Harvard, one of his theses was Why England Slept. And he wrote this book. Another book he wrote strictly for his family was a book about his older brother Joe that was killed in World War II in an explosion, an airplane explosion. And that book was done only for his family. Secret weapons that he used for his campaign. First of all, he ran for Congress 3 times. He was a U.S. Senator for 2 terms. And then he, of course, ran for President of the United States. And those 3 secret weapons, number 1 was his family. His sisters and brothers helped him tremendously, and his mother and dad, in all of the elections. He also had what we call the Irish Mafia. In Charlestown, he met, probably the best day of his life, he met a guy named Dave Powers. Dave Powers, at the time, was taking care of a few of his sister's children, and John Kennedy, as a congressman, was knocking on the door and asking him for his vote. And from that point on, there was a friendship was established that lasted throughout John F. Kennedy's career, including the day he died. He was actually in the second car after the Secret Service car behind the limo that John F. Kennedy was riding in. Dave Powers, being part of the Irish Mafia, really was almost like the White House jester. He would always be making the president laugh, and certain things like saying when he saw the Shah of Iran, you're my type of Shah, or during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Robert Kennedy was coming in and talking to the president and telling things and how serious things were, you'd have Dave Powers on the side, and he was eating chicken and having glasses of wine. And finally, the president, John Kennedy, said to him, "Dave, you're eating us out of house and home here. Is this your last meal?" And of course, Dave Powers, without missing a beat, turned around and said, "Well, according to Robert here, it could be my last meal, the way things are." So he kept things light around the house, in the White House, and in tough times, Dave Powers was always there. And then you had Kenny O'Donnell and Larry O'Brien, who was part of that Irish Mafia, that really tremendously helped the president in all of his endeavors each and every day. So that was terrific. Some of the most things that I have over here. So this is John F. Kennedy's, in this particular book, this is John F. Kennedy's last day at the White House. So this would be the morning of November 21st, and he's meeting with 2 ambassadors from Africa, the American ambassadors. So I find that is the last time John F. Kennedy would be in the White House. On this particular picture here, which is a very interesting picture, this is Jackie Kennedy and Jack Kennedy leaving they are getting on the Air Force One, but they're at Andrews Air Force Base, and they had just dropped off John Jr., and John Jr. was on the Marine One. The Marine One had picked up all of them at the White House, and John Jr. used to love to ride in the helicopter, and he went over to Andrews Air Force Base, and they were saying bye to him, and that they were on their way to, obviously, their trip to Dallas. And one kind of foreshadowing event took place where John F. Kennedy, who always hugged his son and said goodbye to him and whatnot, said to one of the Secret Service agents, Mr. Forrest, at the time, "Mr. Forrest, please take care of my son, John." And Mr. Forrest later on, of course, after the events of Dallas took place, he just remembered that, how unusual that was for him to say that. He had never said that before to him, except the time that JFK was going to Dallas. So, quite interesting, that is. The other secret weapon that I believe that President Kennedy had was his wife, Jackie Kennedy. Jackie Kennedy did travel with him overseas at times, but very rarely, because either she was pregnant or she just decided not to at the time, traveled with him domestically. And when she did travel, she really attracted a great crowd. As Dave Powers would always say, and John F. Kennedy was always conscious of the crowds, he would say to Dave Powers, "What do you think of the crowds today? Do you think we're going to get it?" "Yes, well, Mr. President, we got 100,000 as usual when you're around, but when Jackie's with you, we get an extra 200,000. So she was an added. So at that point, after the death of JFK's son, Patrick, in June, Jackie and John Kennedy became very, very close. And that's when Jackie started really to travel with the president. And obviously, thank God she was with him in Texas. She, in fact, said that to herself, that she was glad that she was at least with him at that time. Ordinarily, she would not have been. All right. Then we have some more of the old magazines that I've collected during that time. And, John Kennedy, of course, we all have to remember, he was only president for 2 years and 10 months. And it's amazing the legacy that he's left behind in 2 years and 10 months. And he faced many different crises: the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Wall going up. He faced civil rights. I mean, there were many, many issues that he handled. And there were many issues, and towards the end, in 1963, with the American University speech on arms limitations and nuclear arms limitations, and obviously his famous speech of 1962 of going to the moon, which in fact did come true in 1969. We all know that in July, when man landed on the moon, and John F. Kennedy was put that thought, put that dream, and that made it a reality by the end of the decade, which was great. So I'm going to show you a few pictures over here. You know, I always say that when the assassination took place, was there someone to blame? I remember as a little boy, you always saw the picture of Clint Hill, who was a Secret Serviceman that was riding right behind, along with many others, and Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers were in that car also. He jumped on the car to try to save the president when he realized that the shots were being fired. And he always regretted that he was unable to prevent the fatal shot at the time. And for years and years and years, and there's a famous interview with Mike Wallace that took place, that he blamed himself. They didn't get there. There are a few, I didn't realize it at the time, but that Clint Hill was actually on the back of the car at one point during the motorcade. This is his autograph right here. He is actually, you can see him right on JFK's limo. And then he got off the limo. And what happened was the crowds were thinning. Basically, they were coming to the end of the motorcade and they were on their way to the trade market. So he got off the limo and went back to the Secret Service car behind. And then that's when the shots started firing, and the next thing you know, Clint was running towards the car. And as the car was pulling away, it was too late. He was able to get on the car, but unfortunately he wasn't able to prevent that fatal shot. So I always wondered about that. John F. Kennedy loved to greet the people. He loved to go into the crowds. He was a high risk by going into the crowds. The Secret Service knew that. There's a famous story with Tim Russett that tells a story about his dad, who was a garbage man in Buffalo, New York. And John F. Kennedy's motorcade was coming to Buffalo, and Tim Russett's father says, oh, we're going to stand on this particular corner. You're going to be able to see him. He's going to go right by here, and you're going to be able to go right up there and see him up close. And sure as heck, Tim Russett said that's exactly what happened. He was 10 years old at the time, and he walked right up to JFK's limo and shook hands with him. So that's an example of the maybe the lack of security, or, you know, no president had been assassinated, 60 years before William McKinley. So there was incidents with Franklin Roosevelt, where a Chicago mayor was killed with him. There was an incident with President Truman at the Blair House across the street from the White House, an assassination attempt there. But other than that, there was no really modern day attempts on the president's life. So it was kind of like maybe beyond their thinking. I think the Secret Service had it, but that particular day in Dallas, the crowds, if you see many of the different pictures, you see people taking pictures of the president pretty close to the limousine. Very, very close to the limousine. And there's actually a famous picture of a bus coming down the street. So they, at one point, they didn't even cordon off the street and let a regular bus come down, and then it realized, oh my God, it's the presidential motorcade coming. And it pulled off to the side, and here you see President Kennedy and his wife and Governor Connolly and his wife waving to the people on a bus that probably shouldn't have been there. But that's the idea of the lack of security. And the Kennedys themselves, if you notice some of the pictures here, you see when they landed at San Antonio, you see the makeup here. You see Jackie Kennedy, you see Nellie, you see the president, you see Connolly. Now, it's the way they're sitting. Then if you go to Houston, you see Connolly in the back, John F. Kennedy, and you see Nellie, and you see Jackie Kennedy there. And you say to yourself, well, what's the story about this seating arrangement? Because you know how they were seating in Dallas the way they were. Well, it's because the Secret Service said they were almost like playing musical chairs. They were changing seats constantly. So once again, a security risk where they were actually getting out of the car. And during some of the motorcades in some of these Dallas cities, John F. Kennedy would actually ask the Secret Service man, Joel Greer, who was driving the car, to, William Greer actually was driving the car, to slow up. And people would come up to the car and he'd stand up and shake hands with little boys or girls or anybody else that wanted to, or a group of nuns on the side. So he was a very high-risk president because he wanted to be with the crowd. He wanted that bubble top roof. If it was a beautiful day, which it turned out to be a beautiful day in Dallas, he wanted, the people to be able to see him and see them all. He even told his wife, Jackie Kennedy, when she put on sunglasses, "Please take those off, Jackie. I want the people to see you. They're here to see you." So the bubble top, by the way, even if it was on, maybe it would have deflected a bullet, but it was not bulletproof. That car is what they call, the Secret Service called the X-100. This is a little model of the X-100. It was a parade car. It was not bulletproof. It was later on, after Kennedy's assassination, it became bulletproof, but it was not. It was basically a parade car. It had jump seats in there where the president would sit behind the jump seats, which they were in Dallas, and actually they had a device where they could lift the president up so he could see the people better. So it was not a car. It was not built to protect the president in that way. Okay. This was John F. Kennedy's personal plane called the Air Force One. Believe it or not, back then in the 1960s, the President of the United States did not have a particular plane that he would ride on. There are many pictures you'll see of John F. Kennedy as the President coming in orange and white planes and different things like that. Well, finally, they designed a plane for him. And not only was, as I said to you before, that Jackie Kennedy was a tremendous asset to him, she not only designed and restored the White House, she had a lot to do with designing Air Force One, with the colors and the seal and the United States of America on top of it. One of the reasons when they went to Dallas, they went to San Antonio, they went to Houston, they went to Fort Worth, and on some of these places they would constantly get on the Air Force One and fly in, because that magnificent Air Force One coming in, that made the president look like $1 million, flying in, especially to Love Field at Dallas. And it was possible that in some of these cities they could have taken the motorcade right into the next city, but they didn't. They always kept going on the Air Force One and repeating somewhat the same ceremony. They would get on the plane, come off the plane, Jackie would be dressed, John F. Kennedy would be dressed, he'd come down and he'd meet Lyndon Johnson, and behind them would be the governor coming out of the same Air Force One. And they would do this at every stop. So they would do it at San Antonio, they would do it at Houston, and it was almost the same thing happening again. If you notice, Jackie Kennedy in San Antonio is dressed in the exact same outfit in Houston. And then they would go back and change clothes, then they would go to the airport again, get back on the Air Force One, and the whole thing would be happening, again. They'd see the same vice president they saw an hour ago, go through the same line shaking hands. They would receive flowers and things like that, and that was the routine. Everybody, in the course, in those towns and cities would see them for the first time, but this continuously happened that whole day, that whole November 21st and 22nd that happened. Speaking of flowers, in every one of the stops, Jackie Kennedy and the vice president's wife, Lady Bird Johnson, they would receive yellow flowers, the yellow rose of Texas, of course. However, in Dallas, Jackie Kennedy received red roses. And that always stuck in her mind. Why in all the other cities, why in San Antonio, why in Houston, why in Fort Worth, but in Dallas I got red roses. And, it was kind of a symbol for all of us that, red and blood and what happened that day. And, I kind of investigated a little bit about those roses. And I found out many of the news programs during that time had pictures. There wasn't really many people that had color TVs back then. And some of the limousines that you see, they identify as the presidential limousine with the red roses, so they say, in the back of the car. Well, in fact, they are looking at the vice president's limousine and yellow roses. Because I'll tell you what happened to the red roses. The person that gave Jackie Kennedy the roses at Love Field was, her name was Dearie Cabral. She was the mayor's wife of Dallas. That's who presented the red roses to her. And of course, when John F. Kennedy got into the limo here, Jackie put the roses between herself and the president. As the assassination took place, and they, of course, went on to Parkland Memorial Hospital, if you can believe this, and it's unreal, that the governor was in the way. They had to remove Governor Conley, who had also been shot that day. They removed him first onto a gurney and brought him in. Clint Hill, Dave Powers, Kenny O'Donnell were there trying to convince Mrs. Kennedy to let go of her husband because he was so severely wounded. And Clint Hill took off his suit jacket and put it over the head of the president. And the president's head was in the roses. And if you see pictures, when he goes on the gurney, the roses go with him inside Trauma Room 1 in Parkland Hospital. And of course, once he was in the hospital, they took the roses and threw them in the waste paper basket at the hospital. The roses continue, though. A few of those doctors that were working on John F. Kennedy, to no avail, unfortunately, did take some of those roses as souvenirs. And the chief of police also took one of those roses. He, in fact, did get a rose, he says, out of the limousine, and he gave it to his daughter. And they have those roses to this day from that. So that's the story of the red roses. But it always was a quandary for Jackie Kennedy, is why did she receive red roses and not yellow roses like all the other stars? So many different mysteries of why things happen like that. We're not sure. So anyways, in Dallas, Texas at the time, John F. Kennedy really knew. It was not a secret that he was going into Dallas, rough country. He himself called it nut country at the Hotel Texas. The Hotel Texas is in Fort Worth. That's the last place that he stayed that night. The next morning they got up, went outside, and had a speech, and then he went to a breakfast inside, and then they took a rented limousine, which is this one right here, which took them to the airport, Love Field, which eventually took them to the Air Force, then to Love Field, and they landed in Love Field. But he himself knew that he was going into dangerous country because Adlai Stevenson had warned him not to go there because he had had bad experiences there. Billy Graham had warned him. William Fulbright, Senator Fulbright, had warned him. So it's not something that Kennedy did not know in his head. It's going to be, there's a problem going on. And he was there to solve a problem between Vice President Johnson and Conley and Ralph Yarbrough, who was also riding in with the Vice President at the time. There were problems between the liberals and conservatives. And John Kennedy needed Texas to win in 1964. He did win it in 1960, but not by a lot. He, in fact, lost Dallas big time by 62%. So the people of Dallas were not in favor of John F. Kennedy. Or that was the perception, but you would never have known that on November 22nd with all the people that came out to greet him that particular day. Okay. Here's a picture of the mayor's wife that's actually giving Jackie Kennedy those red flowers we talked about earlier. I like to collect pictures that are somewhat unusual or have some sort of theme behind them. First, here's once again the picture of the Air Force One that Jackie Kennedy helped design, and also it was pronounced 26,000, and it's actually in Dayton, Ohio. It's in a museum now, and people go there to see it. The limousine that we talked about earlier, the presidential limousine, is in Henry Ford's museum. And 2 years ago, at the 50th anniversary, Clint Hill was there signing autographs and telling his story about that tragic day. This picture over here, I like this in particular because of, as I had mentioned earlier, that Jackie Kennedy had lost a baby, Patrick, It was born and it died shortly after that from lung failure. And John Kennedy and his wife really became a lot closer as a result of that, the death of their baby. Not only that she decided she would travel with him, but you see them in a lot of the pictures after that holding hands, or she's holding on to him. So I really enjoyed that picture to see that, you know, the last days of his life appeared to be really good days for him. On these other, of course, the famous pink outfit there, most of these things have been on display at various times. Jackie's outfit had never been on display, and my understanding is it is in the National Archives, and we will not be able to see that for another 100 years. So the people that are living then will have that opportunity to see that. Over here, we see, like I had mentioned before, that the people in the cars are changing seats and going all over the place and really enjoying a wonderful, beautiful stay in all the different cities in Texas, and things are going really, really well. We have the picture of the Texas Depository window where the alleged assassin apparently was there, Lee Harvey Oswald, which we are told. A picture I have here, which is really somewhat, once again, it's frightening to see something like this. Is the president's limousine is coming off Main Street. It's about a 120-degree turn right there. And the president always has a habit throughout his life of brushing back his hair all the time, even if he didn't have to. And they're going around this corner right here. So there he is brushing back his hair. They're about to turn onto Houston Street, and then they'll be taking that 90-degree left turn, the fatal turn, on Elm Street. And in the background there, you see the Texas Book Depository building, where the assassin apparently was on the 6th floor of that building. And, you know, speaking of assassins and things of that nature, you know, there have been many, many conspiracy theories and movies and books that have been written about, you know, who did the 5 assassins, 20 bullets, this and that. Well, I had the pleasure of meeting Walter Cronkite up at the Low Auditorium. And I asked Walter Cronkite, I said, Walter, I said, you know, you worked for CBS, you were the first one that announced basically on TV that the president was dead. And when Walter Cronkite said something, the world believed it. And I said to him, Walter, who do you think really killed? Who's behind the killing of John F. Kennedy? And Walter said, despite all the books, despite the movies, despite the conspiracy theories, the Warren Commission was thorough in their investigation. And there were witnesses beyond witnesses that actually saw the assassin up in the 6th floor window. There was a young boy a day before that was his name was Sterling Wood. He was at a firing range, and next to him, he was admiring this guy that was shooting with this strange-looking gun, an Italian gun, rifle. And he was saying, oh my God, you're a fantastic shot. And Lee Harvey Oswald actually said to him, well, thanks for saying that. He saw them. There's so many witnesses. There were 2 fellows that were on the 5th floor that worked at the Texas Depository. They could hear the cartridges dropping as the bullets were being fired, and dust particles were falling down on them. They heard it from upstairs. There were people across the street that saw it, and it just was, because it was in seconds and it happened so quickly, nothing was done about it. But, so I want to say that, you know, the Warren Commission did, I believe, a thorough job. Now, that's not to say who put Lee Harvey Oswald up to it. Well, that maybe opens another can of worms. We don't know that. But based on the evidence, which also includes fingerprints on the rifle, which also has threads of his clothes on the rifle, which places him where he was. He had the gun stored at a friend's house, and his wife identified the gun. She had seen it before. He had his picture taken with the gun before. He apparently has been tied into an attempted assassination of another fella named General Walker, who was part of the right-wing group of people, the Birchers, and so he's linked every which way. He was the only person that was missing that day from the Texas Depository. He had just got that job a month earlier. He was the only person missing that day. when the supervisor, the same supervisor that hired him, is the supervisor that said he was missing. He was the same person who was identified about an hour later, or less than an hour later, that he apparently shot police officer J.D. Tippit, and eventually he was captured at a Texas theater. And so there's so much that, you know, there are volumes and volumes of police reports, and I think the Warren Commission got it right. And it's, you know, we're 52 years later, and despite all the controversy and conspiracy theories, nothing has been proven. So I think they got it right. And I think, you know, as I said earlier, maybe the Secret Service were lax in their behavior. But I do think the Dallas police, and in capturing in the 1960s Lee Harvey Oswald that quick, I think they did some really good police work at that time. Not so good at protecting him days later when he himself was assassinated by Jack Ruby, unfortunately. But that's another story. All right, so we were talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, and of course, I was home on that day, of course, with the rest of the world, watching the events on TV. Literally, and I'll say it, the world stood still, and certainly Massachusetts stood still. Everybody was glued to their television, and there was only so many channels back then, but I don't care if there was cable TV back then. Everybody would be watching TV or talking about what happened, and just day to day. There were no sporting events, there were no regular scheduled programs. It was all about John F. Kennedy, and, you know, from the assassination to what was going on, to the funerals and whatnot. One of the things about John F. Kennedy's funeral that I don't think I will ever forget is, you know, LBJ, who became the 36th President of the United States, he was sworn in on the Air Force One, right in Dallas at Love Field. And he was sworn in after Jackie Kennedy got on the plane, along with the casket, which is another story about John F. Kennedy's casket not even fitting on the plane, and they had to take off the handles, and they had to take out a few rows of the Air Force One so he could, so the casket could properly fit onto the plane. But at the swearing in, it was the first time in history that a female judge, was swearing in the President of the United States. Most of the time, the oath of office is taking place in Washington, D.C. There are a few incidences in assassinations of McKinley and Garfield and John F. Kennedy and George Washington. Of course, there was no Washington at the time when he was sworn in. They took the oath of office outside of Washington, D.C. So that was an unusual event, a woman judge swearing LBJ in. And while we're on the subject of Lyndon Johnson, very few people know that, you know, John F. Kennedy had such a glow about him that everybody else faded into the back. And that was including LBJ. LBJ was a great majority leader. He himself ran for president, in fact, against JFK, and did not win. JFK got the delegates and was smart enough to figure that LBJ would be a good person to have on the ticket with him, and they went on to defeat Richard Nixon and Henry Cabot Lodge. And LBJ kind of faded into the background because, you know, I mentioned earlier that Kennedy had his Irish mafia, and he had other people, elite and academic people around him, and I will give LBJ a lot of credit to do what he did as being the vice president. And we know in history that the vice president's job has been a thankless job. It's almost like compared to not doing anything, because you're not, the glow is on the president and what he does. And on that day when John F. Kennedy was buried in the famous march to the Arlington National Cemetery, very few people know the President of the United States, the 36th President of the United States, he also walked that day. And most people don't know that. And I think that took a lot of courage for LBJ to walk that day after going through an assassination of his predecessor, that who knows if there was conspiracy people still out there, or some sort of plot to kill or disrupt the government in some way. But he did that. And one person who noticed it was Jackie Kennedy. And afterwards, Jackie Kennedy wrote him a wonderful letter expressing her gratitude for the President of the United States walking with them. I mean, you always see the pictures of Jackie, and you see Robert Kennedy, and you see Ted Kennedy, and the Kennedy family, but you see very few pictures of the President of the United States, LBJ, at that particular time. LBJ also, when he was on the Air Force One and they were on their way back from Dallas, one of the first things he did was call John F. Kennedy's mother, Rose Kennedy, and of course expressed his sympathy for everything that happened. And that conversation is recorded, and it sounds to me like Rose Kennedy had a pretty good relationship with the president. And he also called Robert Kennedy and explained, what happened and how sorry he was. And the two of them apparently did not get along at times. But also he wrote 2 letters, one letter to John Jr. and one to Caroline for them to read later on in life about their father and how great he thought their father was. So sometimes I think LBJ has been underrated in a lot of ways with the Kennedy administration, but I think he took it in stride. And then he went on to do great things, certainly with Medicaid and Medicare and Head Start programs for all of us. So I think LBJ, unfortunately, with Vietnam and things like that, he has gone down in history as not the most successful president, but he was president during a tough time. And I think he did pretty good under sometimes straining circumstances. John F. Kennedy also had another devoted, he had many devoted people, and one of them was Evelyn Lincoln. And the story of Evelyn Lincoln, and as being a principal of a school, I rely very heavily on my secretary here at our school. And you begin to think alike, you just kind of rely on each other. Well, that's how Evelyn Lincoln was. And one thing about Evelyn, she was infatuated by the president, as everybody else was, and she started to collect things. And if John Kennedy used a certain pen to, sign a certain bill, or he doodled on a certain paper, or the collection started getting pretty big. So I was down the John F. Kennedy Library one day, and I've gone through there many, many times. And I had just finished reading a book by Evelyn Lincoln about my 12 years with John F. Kennedy. And I was very, very surprised that there was no display or no really mention of this person that was very, very close to the president. I have a picture over here of her at her desk, and she's surrounded by pictures of John F. Kennedy. And of course, she's actually watching a TV. And who's on the TV? John F. Kennedy. So she was infatuated with him. And when I was at the Kennedy Library, I had asked somebody about why isn't there a display on her? She was so much a part of his life, and she really did so much with him, and he relied on her so much. Well, apparently, years later, she had developed quite a collection of Kennedy memorabilia that was things that she apparently just took. She was corresponding with a young man like myself back then, who was, writing into the president and asking for autographs or pictures or things like that. And this man's name was Robert White. He was only a young man at the time, and he was writing to Evelyn Lincoln and asking her, "Can you send me a picture of John Kennedy?" And she'd send a few things, and maybe she would send things that were more than just the picture, or she might be sending a pen or a book or something that actually was on John F. Kennedy's desk. Well, Robert White went on to be one of the biggest collectors of Kennedy memorabilia in the world. And thanks to Evelyn Lincoln, their connection. And they actually kind of teamed up together. And I'm not going to say that Evelyn Lincoln was taking things to sell it on eBay. There was no eBay then. But she amassed so much stuff that the Jackie Kennedy and John Kennedy, now older, and Caroline Kennedy, when they were doing the library, they had to go to court and try to get some of the things back from Evelyn Lincoln. So that's why one of the reasons you don't hear so much about her in the Kennedy Library, because she was frowned upon as a secretary, apparently, that was taking things without permission. Perhaps some of the things were given to her by President Kennedy. She did have, the task of removing all the things from the Oval Office that day after Dallas. That was one of her top priorities when she came back on the Air Force One that she was in charge of removing the president's things from his office. I might add, Evelyn Lincoln's picture is everywhere. She was in Dallas that day. She was also the famous picture of Jackie Kennedy and Robert Kennedy with the casket coming off the Air Force One and going into the ambulance. Evelyn Lincoln's picture is there. She's behind Johnson in the swearing in on Air Force One. She's a part of that family at that time, everywhere. As there is another person, Jackie Kennedy's assistant, Mary Gallagher. Mary Gallagher traveled that particular day because another assistant could not make it. Her name was Provincia. Provincia had a confirmation ceremony for her son, and she did not go to the Dallas trip. Ordinarily, she would have been. And Mary Gallagher went that particular day, and she accompanied Jackie, and she's in all the pictures. If you see Jackie Kennedy getting on the Air Force One with the casket in front of her, Mary Gallagher is right behind her. I did a little investigation. There was a picture that was shown, in fact I have the picture here, of somebody had told me that in JFK's limo at Parkland Hospital there were white gloves, and it's been pointed out those are the white gloves that Jackie Kennedy was wearing. So I kind of said to myself, well, how could those be the white gloves? And looking at it and trying to say, geez, I don't think those are white gloves. They could be Kleenex, they could be a towel or something. But with all my research that I have done, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, that on the Air Force One, when President Johnson has taken the oath of office, Jackie Kennedy is right next to him. Lady Bird, to read her books and things that she has written about that day, she commented on the white glove that Jackie Kennedy was wearing, still on the Air Force One. I believe what happened was she still had the gloves on, or at least one of them we know, and she took them off on the Air Force One after that ceremony was taking place. They were never to be seen again, but I believe what happened was, for whatever reason, the Secret Service, while the limousine was parked outside, Secret Service and whoever else, FBI, they were outside, they were wiping, cleaning the limo of the blood and its contents on that day. So I believe that is some sort of cloth or tissue or somebody that was cleaning that particular day and it remained in the car. And I believe the white gloves, probably somebody has those gloves in their collection that was there that day. Jackie Kennedy's hat was also missing. The last time that hat was seen was going into the hospital at Parkland, and Secret Service, there are Secret Service men that have documented that that hat was given to Gallagher, Mary Gallagher, the assistant of Jackie Kennedy, but that hat has never been seen again. And once again, I said about the suit. The suit is in the National Archives. The Air Force One is in Dayton, Ohio. It's a museum. You can actually board it and see where the president's body was, where Johnson took the oath of office. The limousine is in Henry Ford's Museum in Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan. You can actually see the actual Kennedy car. The Kennedy car actually was refurbished, armored, bulletproof and whatnot, and I think it left the President Carter's regime as president, and then it was retired after that. Okay, other stories I can tell about at Parkland Hospital. When the President of the United States was, when they were notified, Parkland Hospital, which was approximately 10 miles away from where they were, assassination took place at 12:30, and why everybody says that 12:30 kind of sticks out in everybody's mind, because on top of the Texas Book Depository, there was a time, a clock. And everybody, of course, immediately looked at that clock, and there's also a temperature gauge there, so everybody knew the time. So in every pictures you see with the presidential limousine pulling away, you see that 12:30. And then he apparently was pronounced dead at 1 o'clock at Parkland Hospital. And when the president's limousine headed towards the hospital, and they were going at speeds of up to 80 miles an hour, they went right by the trade mart where he was supposed to have a luncheon and a speech. And people were actually, you see people waving, thinking, it's part of the motorcade, not realizing something has happened. So Parkland Hospital was notified ahead of time that there's been an assassination, shots fired, somebody's been wounded. There's all kinds of speculation what's going on. And they pull into Parkland Hospital, and a couple things happen. Number one, nobody greets them. So literally people, the Secret Service men have to jump out of the car, go in, going to the Secret Service behind in the car, Dave Powers, Kenny O'Donnell, they're running in to get the gurneys to bring them out. No one's greeting them right away because it's confusion. There's probably disbelief who's coming in. And what happens is they take Governor Connolly out first because he was closest to the door and kind of in the way. As they brought Governor Connolly into Trauma Room 2. The President, John Kennedy, went to Trauma Room 1. And the doctors, all different doctors from everywhere in Parkland Hospital, and it's also a teaching hospital. Some were teaching classes, some were in surgery, some were in the cafeteria, wherever they were called down to Trauma Room 1. So you had the President's room loaded with people. There actually was a nurse there that tried to keep people out. There were so many people in there. In Trauma Room 2 now, you have the Governor of Texas, and not many people were checking on him at all. And what happened was happened to be a doctor walking by, looked in there, and he noticed a person gasping for breath, and that was Governor Connolly. And as a result, this person ran and got another doctor, and the doctor came in there and literally saved John Connolly's life. And we would have had a second tragedy had he been left alone like that. John Connolly would write a beautiful letter to Parkland Hospital staff. He would go to the commencement exercises at the end of the year and thank everybody for helping him that day, because all emphasis was on the President forgetting the governor at that time. One of the doctors that is still alive today, Dr. McClellan, he worked on John F. Kennedy in Trauma Room 1. He is also, within 2 days, he would work on Lee Harvey Oswald, the assassin. And he's got a remarkable story that I think is interesting. About a year before, he had seen John F. Kennedy at Baylor University. And his wife apparently had been working there and asked him to pick up her paycheck. So he went over, he walked over to see, and he saw limousines parked at Baylor. And he said, "Oh, who the heck is here?" "It's the President of the United States." And it was John Kennedy. So John Kennedy had been to Dallas before. And he was visiting Sam Rayburn, who was in the hospital at the time. And Dr. McCowan had said, "Geez, I got right near him. I could actually almost touch him if I wanted to." And it's an amazing that within a year later, he in fact would be right with John F. Kennedy trying to save his life. He also tells the story of his wife that day on November 22nd, that his wife had taken his 2 children to the pediatrician. And in the pediatrician's office, the receptionist had said, "Hey, the President of the United States is coming right by here. We're all going to go outside in the street and look at him." So his wife and the 2 children went outside and they saw the President go right by, and his wife said the same thing. "Oh my God, we were so close to him, it's unbelievable." And little did she know, or her children know, that within the hour, her husband would be working on the President of the United States trying to save his life. Another little connection a few years later, he also would consult with another doctor with a patient named Abraham Zapruder. And he would be the man that would take that footage of John F. Kennedy being assassinated. Footage that was, there were many pictures taken that day with people with their cameras and things like that, but he would have the video of the whole assassination, what took place. And he almost didn't go that day. He actually forgot his camera and he had to go home to get the camera. And he actually had a business a couple buildings over near the Texas Depository, and he was in the right place to see a wrong thing, but at the right place to take that film of the whole assassination. And that's the film we always see to this day. There was a person named Robert Stoley who went on to start People magazine. He's the one that worked for Life magazine, and because of his kind words, he was the first one to go to Abraham Zapruder to ask him about the film and to see the film. He ended up getting the film for Life magazine, and he's always been credited for that. But the film, you know, we back then, when it happened in 1963, we never saw the entire film until 1975. That fatal wound shot was never seen on TV until 1975 when Geraldo Rivera had a special on TV and had a bootleg copy of the assassination. From that point on, you know, you go to YouTube and everywhere, you've seen that horrible scene. And that's the first time. So it took all that time from, you know, 63 to 75 before you saw that actual frame, which was the fatal shot of the President of the United States, taken by Abraham Zapruder. I do know a story that he did donate. He did receive $50,000 from Life magazine, but as time went on, they received a lot more. The family received a lot more than that. He did donate at the time $25,000 to J.D. Tippit, the police officer that was killed by Oswald at that time, to that fund. And while J.D. Tippit, Jackie Kennedy did contact J.D. Tippit's wife, and of course, you know, told them how they had things in common, of course, happening that day, both losing their husbands, and that the eternal flame at the Arlington National Cemetery would also represent her husband. And Robert F. Kennedy, you know, called the family also and had explained, if my brother didn't come to Dallas, your husband would still be alive. And that's, you know, fate, how that would be. But at the hospital, in Trauma Room 1, all the doctors came in there and they did what they could to try to, many believed that it was beyond hope, but there was a faint pulse. They did do a tracheotomy on the president, and they did put a tube down his throat, all to no avail, but which created conspiracy theories after that. And then the president was pronounced dead at 1 o'clock. Dr. Kemp Clark pronounced the president dead. There was a priest, his name was Huber, H-U-B-E-R. They actually waited for the priest to come in and give the president last rites, even though the president was already dead. And then they announced to the world that the president had died. 1 o'clock Dallas, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And of course, Walter Cronkite is the famous news person that came on and announced to all of us that President Kennedy was dead. A little bit of controversy that took place after the John F. Kennedy's death was Kenny O'Donnell, William Greer, the driver of the car, the limousine, Roy Kellerman, who was the Secret Service man that was also in the limousine, and other Secret Service. A confrontation took place between the medical examiner, his name was Earl Rose of Dallas, and because John F. Kennedy was murdered, it was a homicide, that automatically all homicides have to be, a medical examiner has to do an autopsy. Well, the Secret Service, FBI, Jackie Kennedy, and the Irish Mafia were having no part of that. They were taking the body of the president back to Washington, D.C. And there was a little bit of a confrontation between, heavy-handed between Dr. Rose, the Dallas police, the FBI, so it was kind of a lot of controversy, but Kenny O'Donnell and a few others made the decision, we're going through. And they went through and they took the president to Air Force One. And then, of course, he went for his autopsy at the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. So he did have an autopsy. But once again, the conspiracy theories were, had the doctor, the medical examiner in Dallas done a thorough one, or was able to do one, at least, perhaps all these conspiracy theories would be killed right away. Because a lot of the doctors, when they first saw John F. Kennedy, they saw there was a bullet hole in his throat, and they thought it was an entrance wound. And they all were convinced of that. They never turned him over, that he had a hole through the back of his neck, through his suit jacket that went out through his neck. That was not done until Bethesda. So the doctors there did not even know that there was another bullet hole in the back of his neck. And also when they did the tracheotomy, it kind of, by the time he got to Bethesda, that was covered over. So no one was sure of what. But most of the doctors, if not all of them in the end, have determined that he was definitely, President Kennedy was shot from behind. And most likely the Texas Depository, and most likely Lee Harvey Oswald, which was more or less been proven. And a lot of people maybe don't know that day in Dallas, John F. Kennedy, of course, died. The Texas governor, John Connally, he was wounded severely, but there was another person that was also hit, and that was a pedestrian. A pedestrian was watching the parade, the motorcade, like everybody else, and apparently a bullet ricocheted off the sidewalk, and it hit this man. And his name was James Tague, and that's his picture right there, and he was hit. So there were actually 3 people hit that day: John Kennedy, Governor Connally, and James Tague. Nellie Connally, who was the governor's wife, went on to write a book about the experiences. And she has always been haunted because as they were going around from Houston to Elm Street, she had took the opportunity to turn around and say to the president, to John F. Kennedy, "You can't say Dallas doesn't love you, Mr. Kennedy, President Kennedy. Look at all the people." And there's no question about it. In San Antonio, in Houston, in Fort Worth, and in Dallas, they certainly came out that day. So she was right about that. But just as she said that, shortly after, seconds, the bullets came. And she wrote a book about her experiences. The motorcade here, this is the motorcade from Dallas. Obviously, we know that John F. Kennedy died that day. John Connally, the governor, died in 1993. Jackie Kennedy died of cancer in 1994. And Nellie Connally, who went on many different shows talking about the experiences of that horrible day, she died in 2006. And she wrote this book all about those experiences. So it's a day that will always go down in history, and anybody who definitely was alive at that time will never, ever, ever forget that day, because not only, when I grew up in Lawrence, there was Lawrence in mourning, in Massachusetts, in the United States, but the entire world. I had the opportunity at one time to meet Eunice Kennedy Shriver, who I honestly believe, if she was around today, she would be running for president of the United States, and I believe she was probably the smartest of all the Kennedys. I met her in Colorado. I was on a trip for the school department for the community of Caring, and she was heading up that along with the Special Olympics. And she turned to me and said, "Now, where are you from?" And I live in Methuen now, but I always say, I grew up in Lawrence and love Lawrence. And she said, "Oh my God, Jack won big in that Mill City." And I said, "Oh my goodness." When I got up and I walked away, I'm like, "That's John Kennedy's sister." And I was like so impressed that, sitting next to her, just looking at her, that she had the pleasure of seeing him every day and being with him every day and talking with him and growing up with him. And like many of his friends, the Irish Mafia and many, many others, and many wrote books. One of his famous friends wrote a book. His name is Paul Fay. He was Undersecretary of the Navy, and he wrote the book, and I think it's a great title, The Pleasure of His Company. And that's how we can sum up John F. Kennedy. With his humor, he made fun of things, he laughed a lot, he never took himself seriously. If you see his press conferences, which I have over here, and various speeches, he tries to always make things humor, whether he's trying to pin something on an astronaut, a medal, and he drops it by accident, or whatever he is doing, he makes fun of it. One of my favorite, I always say I like to connect Kennedy with Lawrence. And one way I connect him with Lawrence is the inauguration. At the inauguration in January 1961, to start off the inauguration, we have Richard Cardinal Cushing from Boston, a great Kennedy friend. He goes to the lectern, he's ready to do the invocation, and all of a sudden all smoke's coming out. There's a great picture of John F. Kennedy just like cracking up on the side. He's sitting there like, wow, this is unbelievable, right? So then you have Robert Frost, 1892 graduate of Lawrence High School. He's coming up, and he's got this poem, special poem, he's dedicated to John F. Kennedy on this special day, and it's called Dedication. Well, it's a snowy, cold, beautiful sunlight. You can't see anything, you're blinded by the light, and he's trying to read it, and he's talking, and he's, I can't see this. Kennedy is once again laughing and saying, oh my God, this is too much. And you see Lyndon Baines Johnson, Vice President, he's got a hat, he's trying to help him out, block the light. He still can't do it. The next thing you know, Robert Frost just says a poem, and it's called The Gift Outright. He's had it memorized. John F. Kennedy actually wanted that poem anyways, and he says it. So, I love those stories like that, because Robert Frost, of course, came here in 1962, and John Buckley was the mayor at that time, and they dedicated the Robert Frost School here in Lawrence after Robert Frost. So we have the connection of that. We also have another person, Leonard Bernstein, who was a familiar guest at the White House, constantly coming. He was a good friend of the Kennedy family. And John F. Kennedy's, one of his favorite plays, one of his favorite songs was Camelot. And in that Camelot play was Robert Goulet. And Robert Goulet sings Camelot along with Richard Burton. And Kennedy played that. Jackie Kennedy has always said that he played that almost every day, Camelot. That became his theme of his administration somewhat. And so those are the three people that affected. So we have Chuck Peabody, that was the governor during the assassination, Endicott Peabody from Lawrence, Robert Frost from Lawrence, Robert Goulet from Lawrence, Leonard Bernstein at Lawrence, all connections with the Kennedy family. I myself saw, not John Kennedy, but I did see Robert Kennedy and Ted Kennedy in 1968 in the St. Patrick's Day Parade in Boston. And I saw Ted Kennedy many, many times after that in that parade. And Ted Kennedy came to Lawrence on several occasions, including the St. Patrick's Day Parade. One example of John F. Kennedy's humor has to do with this record, The First Family, which was a record by Vaughn Meader. And he made fun of the Boston accents of the whole First Family and whatnot. And John F. Kennedy, at one of his press conferences, was asked, what do you think of this record and things? Are you upset? Is it making you mad? Typical John Kennedy response, I don't think it sounds like me at all. It sounds more like Teddy, so he might be upset. So that's humor at different times. Dave Powers, he just looked at life very differently. And, youth, enthusiasm, very smart, a voracious reader, more speeches, I believe, in history that have really meaningful things. Here at my school here, our thing is that one person can make a difference in life. And I believe John F. Kennedy expressed that throughout his whole career.